welcome to the Astranti Industry Analysis for the February 2018 pre-scene on Nortan and the FOSSC. So just before I begin now, I would like to put a quick disclaimer that this is entirely intended to be an accompaniment to the document, so I fully recommend that you read through it yourself and use this video as sort of an aid to that. So just a foreword on how this is going to work. The analysis is primarily focused on the industry with a view of the context of which the pre-scene wants you as your role. So you're a senior financial manager and your primary responsibilities are going to be management accounting. So a lot of P2, okay? So this document is purely to give you that contextual advantage in terms of answering the exam, and a lot of this will be kind of speculation based on the industry, but it's all there to help you have that in mind just in case it comes in handy, essentially. So let's have a quick look at the industry itself. The history. It's a really old industry, and it's a massive one, as you can see. Arguably one of the largest industries in the world, and as you've probably seen in the news a variety of times, a lot of news coverage, it's really important as an industry to the world economy and also politically even, as we'll see throughout. So the early history is not too much to talk about, it's more of just a contextual information. But in recent years, we have these environmental and legal concerns, oil spills, most notably the BP oil spill in 2010. These are big things to sort of think about as far as the industry goes and what this might mean for the unseen material in the exam. But yeah, so Nortan is founded in the early 20th century. So for this reason, we can kind of suggest that they have a first to market advantage, especially when we consider that they're actually vertically integrated. So they have a finger in every pie, if you will, as far as industry goes, and I'll explain a little bit more about that as we move through. So just an overview of what kind of occurs in the industry if you're not too aware. Exploration is kind of, finding the oil. It's the basis of a lot of positive MPV projects. However, there is an element of licensing which makes it a little bit laborious, and it involves political kind of dealing sometimes. Then there's extraction and refinement. So extraction is where you get the oil out of the ground, and refinement is where you turn the crude oil into a product. The transportation is through pipelines mainly, and tankers, that kind of thing. But what we really want to sort of look at as far as industry is concerned, sorry about that, is the upstream, midstream and downstream. So the upstream are companies focused on exploration and production. So this is basically the raw materials and getting them from the ground. The midstream is involved in transportation, storage and like wholesale of crude oil. Sometimes they purchase it from upstream companies, or often is the case, the larger upstream companies are also involved in the midstream themselves. Then the downstream is where companies refine the crude oil into things like gas and other products, as we'll see moving forward. So what does this mean for our pre-scene, and what can we kind of glean from the industry context? Well, we know Nortan are vertically integrated and they operate in all streams. So with that in mind, Nortan can cut a lot of costs, as you can see here, and it also puts an emphasis on management of group entities, lots of subsidiaries, as we see in the pre-scene. Nortan is a truly huge company, and it also means that the FOSSC handles a lot of accounts, and the way in which this is done and the efficiency is really important, given that it's involved in absolutely every aspect of the industry. It also means that it's affected by sort of different aspects, external factors on the streams, but by having a finger in every pie, as you will, they are sort of mitigated. So if exploration projects are less profitable, they can focus on the upstream element of refining into different products rather, and sort of maybe using the low cost of oil for their advantage rather than, you know, exploring and finding oil which is actually selling for a lesser price, for example. So what kind of products can we see? Well, it's not super important. The main one is crude oil, as you will have guessed, and you know, fuels, propane, diesel. Nothing, you know, major here. It's simply that there are a number of products that crude oil is refined to, and Nortan do presumably, we don't know exactly what products, but they do presumably produce most of these, if not all of them. So just a quick look before we get into a more in-depth competitor analysis. The top companies are, as you can see, with Saudi Aramco being the largest. Interestingly, as we come on to, these are all state-owned. The top 3 or 4 are all state-owned companies that focus primarily on upstream. But as we can see moving forward, there is a little bit of an interesting element there. By production, it changes up a little bit. And you can see that, you know, Saudi Aramco is definitely the biggest player in the market. And again, we'll come back to this because there's a whole lot of stuff to talk about. So R&D is focused mainly on advanced fuels. So low carbon, for example, you know, that environmental focus, as we'll see in a moment, you know, the consumers are demanding that this is kind of a focus of the industry. Get that positive press. And another trend is smart fields. So the incorporation of innovative software to ensure that the safety of the oil fields and all the sort of pressures and temperatures are monitored remotely and at real time. So this is kind of a thing that we might see as a new project in the unseen material. But what does this mean for our pre-scene? Well, we know they're vertically integrated, as I've mentioned a couple of times, and by covering all aspects, Nortan kind of fits the mold, if you will, of the big companies. So whilst when we look at their financials, they're not quite as big as those companies we're seeing. Well, actually, no, far from it even, because those companies are positively huge. However, they do sort of mirror that kind of aspect of being involved in all streams. We have like ExxonMobil, they're producing oil, but also refining oil. In terms of R&D, we can kind of assume that digital fields are in place at Nortan because it is an industry standard, and also Nortan has a repetitive mention of innovative software, especially the FOSSC, so you can kind of extrapolate that to the group as a whole. It also mentions in the pre-scene that the FOSSC was primarily driven by technology improvements. So once again, we reinforce this idea of digital trends followed by Nortan as a group. So, you know, digital fields, definitely something that will be either there already or potentially the source or context rather of a question in the unseen. Also, we have this sort of inkling of social and environmental influences on the industry. R&D is primarily focused on sort of meeting the environmental demands even of the populace at large, like the environmental talks at the G8 summits, for example. Nortan will have to keep an eye on whether they're producing enough products or exploring enough areas to find the sort of low carbon fuel options, because it is a really large issue for the industry as a whole in terms of press and sort of the politics surrounding the industry. And just to mention, politics doesn't often come around in many industries as much, but because the oil industry is so large, it really does have quite a lot of political elements, and this is kind of a recurring theme. We'll see pestle come up as quite a few aspects as we move forward. So let's have a look at customers and marketing. So who are the customers? Well, energy providers, as you might expect, and petrol providers. So upstream companies are selling to downstream companies, and essentially they're also selling to energy providers, at least the downstream is. They're selling these refined fuels so that energy providers can turn the fuels into energy and then sell that to the everyday consumer. In terms of, skipping forward there, where it's consumed, there are many countries that consume a wide array of oil, the largest being the United States, China, Japan. This is kind of just giving you contextual information. It's not too important for the unseen material entirely. It's just, having it at the back of your mind. Especially when we consider the segmental analysis that we see in the pre-scene, there is a breakdown by region and how successful Nortan are doing. So the Atlantic, they're doing really well. USA is consuming a lot. So, that kind of goes hand in hand. And then in terms of the Middle East, not so well. So make of that what you will. And next, we have a look at changing demands and trends. So as we've mentioned before, low carbon and carbon neutral fuels are really kind of this big thing as far as outside industry is concerned. So those who are not in the industry, they're very much in tune with this environmental aspect. So a lot of the oil industry is kind of moving slightly towards this way, particularly with renewable energies, for example. And in terms of changing trends, apologies again, unconventional oil. So this is kind of like in awkward environments, and sort of, fracking, for example, is a very different way of producing oil, and there's more and more companies undertaking these weird ways or less conventional ways of getting oil. Also, more digital technologies are an increasing trend, as we've kind of covered before. This kind of thing we might expect Nortan to already be on course for or doing already. So what does this mean for the pre-scene as a whole? Well, oil suppliers have a large bargaining power. So when it comes to their customers, the energy providers and utility companies, they have a very strong ability to build favourable and long-term customer relationships. Likewise, a CRM system isn't referenced, so it could be an important area for optimization. It could be a question in the unseen. I wouldn't necessarily bet on it, but it's one of those considerations to keep in the back of your mind, especially when performance measurement is concerned and sort of the big sales. A lot of the marketing is centered around the sort of lead generation and sales element. So, changing demands, what does this mean? Well, again, we've mentioned it quite a lot already. The environmental aspect is a big deal. So Nortan potentially having a project regarding renewables would be particularly unsurprising, if you will, for the unseen. And changing trends is definitely sort of this software element, and we can kind of suspect that Nortan will be doing this or planning to sort of innovate alongside software. And maybe most potently here is actually that Nortan doesn't necessarily conduct any extraction of unconventional oil. So this is quite strange, because even the biggest companies this year and last year have moved towards like fracking, for example, where they otherwise weren't originally. There's no mention of what Nortan's practices are specifically, so again this could be another question about perhaps sorting any HR problems to do with a very awkwardly placed project, like it could be in a dangerous place, or it could require a huge amount of staff compared to usual. Very sort of wacky things could come this way, because unconventional oil is all around this idea of a really unexpected environment, because essentially they're drilling for oil or sources of oil wherever they can. And just a quick note, the trends sort of point towards an industry that's being maybe forced, but necessarily moving towards a more progressive kind of way. Innovation, environmental aspects, these are sort of the trending topics in the industry, whether the big companies like them or not. So definitely sort of keep, whenever you're thinking about your P2 kind of elements and revising rather, sorry, think about it perhaps in terms of how you could apply this to an innovation or sort of technological question, just to give you a little bit of a competitive advantage when you're doing the exam. I just wanted to take a few minutes of your time to first extend my hope that you enjoyed the free sample that you've just viewed, but also to just sort of explain what else Astranti do to help you pass your exam really effectively, provided you found our sample particularly interesting and insightful, of course. So, of course, we have a study text for every module, ranging from P1 to F3, and the certificate level is also free on our website. So we have study texts throughout the CIMA course, every module you could hope to study. The certificate level are free, as I mentioned, and then the rest of them, ranging from P1 to F3, are all available to purchase. Alongside this, if you're not so much a study text kind of student and you prefer a visual way of learning, we have the course videos. We essentially break down the study text into bite-sized presentations with a walkthrough, and it's a very, very, very engaging way of explaining the course. Following this, we have the pre-scene analysis, where we break down each pre-scene sitting into a number of videos, going through the whole document, but also adding a top 10 recommendations for what will come up in the exam, and also a strategic analysis where we put all the models you'd find in E2, for example, to the pre-scene itself, whichever that may be at the time. Alongside this, we provide an industry analysis. This is a document and accompanying video which help you give that contextual information in your exam. So, for example, if the pre-scene is on the oil industry, the industry analysis will break down the oil industry, the current topics, trends, issues, what the competitive market looks like, all those kind of aspects, all condensed into one so you can spend your time wisely in your study period. Following on from this, when you actually want to practice all this knowledge, we have mock exams for all of our materials. So StudyText has a generic mock exam based on the module, whereas the pre-scene analysis has mocks available to purchase that are based on that specific pre-scene, that are targeted to the key issues we believe will come up. And if you're not content with just doing those mock exams and practicing that way, we have a marking and feedback system where you can purchase the ability to send in your paper, have it marked by a CIMA qualified accountant, and get personalised feedback on whether you can improve X or Y area. And sort of finally, if you will, if you're feeling really underprepared and that exam is coming really, really soon, the master classes are offered by Astranti, and they're essentially a crash course in anything you could want for that topic. So if it's a master class on the pre-scene, it's going to give you absolutely everything that you could possibly need to know about the pre-scene in one really condensed sitting. Likewise, if it was the F3 masterclass, you would have all of F3 gone through in a very crash course style presentation and video link. You can also purchase it post-stream as opposed to viewing it live, all these kind of aspects. We are very, very confident that these materials will help you get the exam success that you want. So we have a pass guarantee. Provided you fill out a form which demonstrates that you have utilised our materials to a large extent and actually taken the time to study them, and you have unfortunately failed, we will offer you the same materials again for the next sitting as a consolidatory offer to ensure that you can get back on the horse and get that exam grade that you want. With that said, thank you very much for watching the sample video. I hope you enjoyed it and it gives you a lot of confidence in Astranti and your CIMA future.